want to introduce our next speaker, Michael Rufo, or Mike Rufo. Mike is a ethics and tech advisor. He has been a singer and a songwriter and performs with a band called No Exit. And he's also a sustainable energy consultant during his day job and an environmentalist. He sits on the board of Defending Rights and Dissent, a civil liberties organization. Mike, would love to hear from you. So fire away.
Great. Thank you so much, Vahid, and thank you, Ethics and Tech, one of my favorite organizations, and these are some of my favorite events, so it's great to be a participant tonight. Yeah, as Vahid mentioned, I'm a musician, civil liberties advocate, and environmental energy consultant, and I'm on the board of Defending Rights and Dissent, a small civil liberties nonprofit in DC. I've tried to be engaged with civil liberties issues for most of my life, mostly due to the influence of my mother and grandfather, who wrote one of the first histories of the ACLU in the early 60s. I only bring this up to note that I think that the maintenance of our civil liberties requires a multi-generational approach and commitment. It's only through the valuing and teaching of civil liberties within our communities and our homes that a democratic society can prevail over time against the age-old tendencies toward authoritarianism. All right, I'll step down from my soapbox for a few minutes. Well, no, I think I need to climb back up. So yeah, after spending most of the last 30 years as a sustainable energy consultant concerned about the environmental impacts of our energy use, I'm now focusing primarily on music, which also touches at times on political activism. One of those moments occurred for me last November in the days before the election when I wrote a satire called Hit the Road Trump, to the tune of course, Hit the Road Jack. So it's a satire about the end of Trump's stay in the White House and how he might react to being the outgoing of 45. However, when I started trying to promote the video on social media, I found that Facebook would not allow me to do so. It took me a while to figure out what was going on and that they weren't just picking on little old artist me. What I quickly learned was that there was a complete ban on advertising of any content on Facebook that Facebook deemed to be related to social issues, elections, or politics. What shocked me about the ban was how broad and far-reaching it was and how it was impacting nonprofits who, sometimes have an interest in social issues. Civil society being always so quaint. It turns out a lot of nonprofits come into the so-called Facebook ecosystem of advertising and learn how they could use the platform to get word out on the good works that they do and to find people who are interested in supporting their work. That all sounds dandy until the mega ban hit. When I looked deeper into the Facebook guidelines, I found where they try to coach you on how to avoid the social issue political ad ban, wherein they'd say something to the effect of, well, if you're an advocacy group for the unhoused, you can advertise that you're having an event tomorrow. But if you say housing is a human right, well, that's going to trigger the ban. Good to know. Thank you, Facebook. It all seemed a bit odd and unnecessarily sweeping and vague. I then found out that it was also affecting Defending Rights and Dissent, and I think it may have also impacted ethics and tech and promotion of events like this. Unfortunately, the impact of the ban on nonprofits has been woefully unreported on, and the limited coverage that there has been focused primarily on the election-related impact of the ban on the advertising spending of the major parties. The New York Times did report on the issue as it relates to grassroots organizations on November 17th, 2020, opening with the question, what do a small business that sells socks packaged by homeless youth and a startup that makes bracelets from life vests once worn by refugees have to do with the spread of misinformation during the presidential election season? Apparently, according to Facebook, well, end quote, now this is me, apparently according to the Facebook ad ban, homeless advocacy and the threat of political violence appear to have a lot in common, strangely enough. Now, I don't want to make light of or minimize the complexity of issues surrounding the confluence of an increasingly incendiary political environment, calls for violence or insurrection, the First Amendment, Section 230, the light-speed evolution of the internet, a political class that cowers to theocrats, 4 decades dumbing down our education system, and the lack of critical thinking skills of the American public. We've definitely got some seriously complex challenges to meet. I do know that something is rotten in a Denmark that goes from zero moderation of where the line is to an outright ban on anything that is social issue related. What isn't social issue related? I can't help but wonder, too, from a psychological perspective, if the Facebook ad ban overreach was a petulant and spiteful rejoinder of Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg to those that dared to question and criticize the almighty Facebook, as occurred from both sides of the aisle in Congress. Remember the book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten? Well, I think that may be Mr. Zuckerberg's Bible. Well, if you don't like my self-interested, profit-first approach to moderation, then see how you like it if I don't let you play with me at all. I'll just take my marbles and go home. Okay then, Mark, so sorry your feelings were hurt. Surely Facebook could have tried to use a scalpel to address the worst cases of incitement to violence or election falsehoods without taking a chainsaw to anything with a point of view. In any case, Facebook maintained the ad ban was temporary, but couldn't say reliably when it would end, first saying it would end in days, then weeks, then months, but it never ended. Actually, until apparently today. Yes, as irony would have it, or perhaps due to their vast surveillance powers, ascertaining that I would be speaking on this issue with you here this evening, Facebook announced yesterday that the ad ban was ending today. I haven't actually tested this yet. I will tomorrow. It just shows you the power of activists exercising their free speech rights. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. No, of course not. What I'm trying to convey here in relation to the topic of the evening is that we must be engaged and vigilant with respect to the role and power of big tech and their ability to surveil and met out social control, whether intentionally or not. I don't mean that in a conspiratorial way. I just mean that in terms of an objective analysis of how much power certain media companies have to moderate speech, the scale of the impacts of what they do with this power, the lack of transparency of their actions, and limited ability to appeal their decisions. Consequently, it is so important to all of us that we grapple with these issues and develop appropriate and effective public policy, regulatory, and personal responses. These are not easy questions as we continue to exist in an environment where technology is evolving far faster than human culture and institutions. On the positive side, kudos to the writers of the First and Fourth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. I think the Fourth Amendment, which protects us from unwarranted searches, was brilliant and prescient in its breadth and simplicity, carving out the bulwark of privacy rights that are the prerequisite of a free society across centuries. In my closing remarks, let me say that although this tale started as the lament of a lowly David artist being censored by the Goliath of Facebook, the takeaway should be a caution about the outsized impact that private sector big tech has on our public square. Interestingly, artists are often the canary in the authoritarian coal mine. Whenever and wherever art begins to be constrained by the speech police, authoritarian trouble can often be found lurking close behind. Algorithms are today's frontline troops of overzealous censors and thought police. If you look at the history of music and political repression, for example, in South America during the military dictatorships of the 60s and 70s, you will find aggressive persecution of artists like Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil in Brazil, and Violeta Parra and Victor Jara in Chile. We owe it to ourselves and coming generations to keep our eyes open and to stay highly engaged with how to protect our civil liberties during times of instability and fear. To protect our civil liberties from reactionary fears, we need to look at the structural problems in our society that lead to political violence, misinformation, and an inability to deduce fact from fiction, to differentiate a lit match from a good-natured satire. Thank you.